Tonight would not be possible without their help. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Rob. On behalf of El Pomar Foundation, we thank you for joining us this evening. El Pomar, since 2002, has had the Forum for Civic Advancement, which has sought to engage and support those who are interested in the civic health of the Pikes Peak region. This event reflects that. We're thankful to the partners who actually made this evening happen and will make it happen. Our friends at the Gazette, represented here by Dan Stever, publisher, and our friends at KOAA 5, represented by Evan Pappas, the president of KOAA 5. Please join me in thanking them. Finally, we all have to be truly grateful to the candidates who are joining us this evening, because it is these candidates who are sacrificing so much and putting their lives on hold that are allowing us to have the democracy that we so enjoy. So please join me in thanking them. With that, let me hand it back to this evening's moderator, Rob Quirk. Rob?
Kyle, thank you. And again, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome all of our viewers tuning in on News 5 Now, Channel 5.2, that's over the air and on cable. We got a great opportunity, a lot of eyeballs on this tonight. Also, all of you checking in online at KOAA.com, thegazette.com, and thestatedebate.com. And of course, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have been sending in questions for the last several weeks. Without your help, all of you checking in online at KOAA.com, thegazette.com, and thestatedebate.com. And of course, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have been sending in questions for the last several weeks. Without your help, this would not be possible as well, and we've tried to cull them down to the most important issues we believe that are facing Coloradans this election cycle and get some straight answers from our candidates here this evening. Great opportunity again to hear directly from the candidates, so let's meet them. First of all, in the race for Attorney General, directly to my left, Republican George Brockler, District Attorney. His Democratic challenger and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Phil Weiser. Phil, welcome. Next to them and running for your state treasurer position this year, Republican candidate and businessman Brian Watson. Brian, welcome. And he is running against Democrat and State Representative Dave Young. Dave, welcome. Finally, in the race for Secretary of State, a familiar face here in El Paso County, Republican incumbent Wayne Williams. Wayne, welcome. And his Democratic challenger, Attorney Jenna Griswold. Jenna, welcome to El Paso County as well. I'd also like to introduce our panelists who, along with myself, we will all be asking questions of the candidates. My co-anchor at News 5, Elizabeth Watts. And again, our very important partnership with the Gazette this time around, along with the El Pomar Foundation and their political reporter. You know him, you love him, Joey Bunch, right there. And just to give you an idea of how this process is going to work, over the next 90 minutes we'll be alternating among the candidates. So basically, we'll be asking questions of the Attorney General candidates, then the State Treasurer candidates, then the Secretary of State candidates, and just keep rotating through. Some of the questions will be specific to those individuals. Others will be general questions about the position itself as we move forward. They will each have 1.5 minutes to answer. But again, we do have a little flexibility. I will have some discretion here. If we need to have something clarified or a follow-up question, we will have that opportunity to ask the candidates to clarify, or if we feel that a question has not been answered, follow up. Again, I want to let everyone on the panel know our timekeeper right there in front. Can everybody see him okay? He will be giving you 30-second cues, correct? And then 10-second cues. And then stop. And we all know what that means, don't we? All right, so there are no opening statements, so we're going to get right to the questions. How about that? Huh? All right. And we are going to start with Joey Bunch from the Gazette. Joey?
Well, first I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Ms. Griswold, gentlemen, we hope this is a lot of fun for you, but not too much fun. So let's dive right in. Mr. Weiser, Mr. Brockler, both of you bring different experiences to this race. You know, Mr. Weiser in academia and regulatory, Mr. Brockler in the courtroom. Which is more important to the job of Attorney General?
Let's begin with Mr. Weiser, please. You have 1 minute and a half.
First, let's give it up for Kyle Hibble, 8 years distinguished service in the Seaboard of Regents. What we need from an Attorney General is broad-based experience. This job has a fairly modest, about 10% of it is criminal prosecution. The rest is a range of other legal issues. Spearheading consumer protection cases, something I've done at the U.S. Department of Justice under 2 presidents. Regulatory matters, you mentioned, Joey, a lot of these issues, healthcare, oil and gas, water, they're regulatory matters. You need to understand how to develop regulations, how to defend them in court, and then a lot of advising on a range of issues like sports gambling or how we manage with different amendments that might be passed. This is the lawyer for the people on every issue relevant to the people of Colorado, from civil rights to consumer protection to protecting our land, air, and water. I've got a range of experience, legal expertise. I also have the leadership experience. As the head of CU Law School, we turn things around. You can talk to Kyle about that. Not an easy time for legal education. We got applications up, we got employment up, we got debt down. That's the innovative leadership I'll bring to be your Attorney General. And finally, this is about priorities. There's a lot of discretion the Attorney General has to act on behalf of the people of Colorado. Do you sue pharmaceutical companies for lying to people? Do you defend the Affordable Care Act? Also, we need the right values. I bring that legal expertise. I bring that leadership experience. I bring the right values.
Mr. Weiser, thank you. And let's now move on to Mr. Brockler again. What's more valuable for an Attorney General, the courtroom, the administrative, regulatory experience? You have 1.5 minutes, sir.
Listen, the state of Colorado is about to hire a lawyer to represent it. It's the top lawyer for all of state government except for the legislature. And anytime you're going to hire a lawyer, you should demand to know what experience that person has acting as a lawyer, especially in the state of Colorado with Colorado's laws. Now, I think it's too myopic to suggest that I've only had prosecution experience or courtroom experience, and there's no doubt I have buckets of that. But I've also been a criminal defense lawyer. I've beaten my own office in trial. How awesome is that? I don't even think John Southers can say that. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. I have been a civil plaintiff's lawyer. I have been a civil defense lawyer. I have represented victims of crime. I have represented people who are wronged by companies and individuals. I have been a chief of military justice, not just here at Fort Carson, but deployed where decisions were far more difficult in Tikrit, Iraq. I've been a regional defense counsel. I've handled cases at every single level of government, municipal, state, federal, and military. But it's not just me saying that having considerable litigation experience is important. If you go to the Attorney General's website right this minute from your phones, and you can do this, if you look up any of the posted Assistant Attorney General positions, they all require significant courtroom experience and litigation experience. And you're talking to an Army colonel who has led a team of 90 prosecutors for 6 years. I'll do this job for us.
Mr. Brockler, thank you. We're going to move on to the state treasurer race. Elizabeth, we're going to start with you. I know we had a specific order here, but if you would direct your question to Mr. Young first. Elizabeth, go ahead.
All right. This is actually for both of you, if that's all right, Mr. Young and Mr. Watson. What plan do you have to identify and appropriately collect? I'm so sorry. I'm nervous. This is my first debate. Okay. Sorry about that.
It does that to
and he's very intimidating. Okay. What plan do you have to identify and appropriately collect online and retail sales taxes from Colorado businesses? Why is this important? Isn't it a nice tax break for consumers who shop online?
Mr. Young, go ahead. You have 1.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Elizabeth. You know, actually, this is an issue that has come through the court system. The Wayfair decision, I think, is what you're talking about at this point. And it really falls not in the Treasurer's office as much as it does in the Department of Revenue. I do think that the issue that we have seen play out is the fact that when there are not taxes collected in the state of Colorado for those that are shopping online, it does present an unfair advantage to those local businesses that in fact are required to do that. So I do believe that it's important that we solve this problem. The courts have spoken. It is going to be within the purvey of the Department of Revenue to actually carry this out, and I think work is going on right now. We have interim committees in the legislature that are working on it.
Thank you.
So I want to thank the Alpamar Foundation for hosting us, and I want to thank every single person who showed up tonight. It means the world to us as candidates. Absolutely, this is not an issue for the State Treasurer's Office, but one of the things the State Treasurer does get to do is speak about financial matters on behalf of the people of Colorado. And so I'm a big believer that government should only do what the people cannot do for themselves, and we need to ask some very discerning questions of what should be on that list. As it relates to sales taxes specifically, I think government does need to look at this idea of creating a more level playing field for competition, because it is unfair if you are spending money on bricks and mortar in a local community trying to create jobs and opportunity and paying your proportionate share of taxes, and somebody who's shopping online is not. And so we have to remember that this has to be about people first, and we have to make sure that it has an even level playing field for competition to thrive and to grow.
I want to move to the Secretary of State's race, and one of the questions that comes up, and it's obviously at the end of the day, the ballot initiatives Y and Z are going to be decided by voters, and essentially what Colorado voters are going to decide upon is to basically incorporate unaffiliated voters along with Democrats and Republicans with the establishment of a commission to redraw these lines every 10 years. But as the Secretary of State, and first, Jenna, I'm going to direct this question to you. What are your impressions as to where this state needs to go in terms of redrawing these lines, and more importantly, the incorporation of parties not normally associated with redistricting?
Well, thank you for having us here. It's such an honor to be here, and that's a great question. I support Y and Z, and what that does is take redistricting and drawing our local maps out of the hands of politicians. No one wants politicians to draw their own maps, and it puts it in the hands of a commission that's representative of our state. For Democrats, for Republicans, and for unaffiliated. And how we choose those people, it's a really complicated way, but it makes sure it's really fair. And I support these measures because, number one, it will make sure that racial gerrymandering is prohibited in the state of Colorado. I think that's important. And it makes sure that we have geographical representation when we're drawing those maps, that we have different people's voices heard. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. I do believe that how redistricting has historically worked in Colorado hasn't quite worked quite right, because it's had to be kicked up to the judiciary to draw the maps. So I fully support that, and I hope those measures move forward, because at the end of the day, we live in a democracy. And just like voting, just like petitioning, when we draw the maps, we want to make sure that every eligible person, whether you're Republican, whether you're independent or a Democrat, has their voices heard, both in voting, both in petitioning, and then how we elect our elected leaders.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, same question to you. Just give us your perspective on the questions before voters, and if they do in fact pass, where do you come down as far as that is concerned?
Thank you very much for the question. The current system is broken. The legislature has failed to act with respect to congressional districts for the last several cycles. I was one of the plaintiffs saying, you have to redraw the districts. You have to make them equal in population. With respect to the legislative districts, I'll give you an example. If you go east of here, you'll be in Calhoun, Colorado. If you then go up to Denver and drive up I-70, you'll be in Georgetown. That's the same Senate district. That illustrates how poorly the districts are drawn under the current system. I support Y&Z. I met with the proponents very early on in the process. Former Secretary of State Bernie Busher was in my office talking to me about those issues. We provided input. We supported them through the legislature. They will make a much better system than the current one. The Secretary of State's office needs to be able to provide firsthand knowledge of how elections work and helping them draw districts that follow existing lines where practicable, so that you don't have a single house left in one district for one office and another district for another, which takes away that voter anonymity. And so having gone through that process, having been a plaintiff, we're going to be providing input to them so that they, as citizens, can make the best decisions for Colorado. I strongly support Y&Z. It's supported by a bipartisan group of people across the political spectrum, so please support those.
I do want to follow up real quick with both candidates on this. One of the opponents, or those who are opposing both of these measures, basically are saying, okay, we're including unaffiliated voters, but what about the other political parties in Colorado that aren't going to have a representative voice? Jenna, first, let's turn to you. Speak to that issue, and it seems like that's a fair question, that even though it's expanded to unaffiliated voters, there's still going to be some political parties that are going to be left out of the process. And you have 1 minute, by the way.
Okay, thank you. So I do think it's really important that everybody's voice is heard. I do think this Y&Z is a great step in the right direction. Not only are we making sure that there's not racial gerrymandering, that may be rolled back under U.S. constitutional law. We're making sure that the system is transparent, that lobbyists aren't drawing the maps. But more importantly, right to your question, is that the public has input in real time. No decisions are made behind closed doors. And the way that these amendments would work, if they're passed, is there's rules that the commission would have to comply with. So other political parties, I definitely hear their concerns, and I would encourage folks, whether you're Green Party, Constitutional Party, be part of the system. You can give maps. Suggest maps. Make sure that the maps are drawn fairly, and at the end of the day, if the system isn't working, it will go back to the judiciary.
Hey, and Wayne, the thing is, a lot of people who are complaining about how the election process is working these days is exclusion rather than inclusion, and obviously the opponents are saying, wait a minute, sure, we're moving it forward, but not far enough. Your reaction, you have 1 minute, Wayne.
I don't think any ballot issue is likely to be perfect. But what I do know is the current system essentially provides for one party having complete control. The new system allows unaffiliates to play a key role in the decision-making factor. They are the largest group of voters in the state of Colorado, so including them is, I think, important. I think the new system does provide that opportunity for input. In past years, sometimes maps have been adopted without any prior notice, without anyone knowing what was going to be done. And the new system provides for a public input and public notice and the opportunity to comment on those maps, which is absolutely critical. No matter how wise any 12 people are going to be, they don't know every community, they don't know every community of interest, and so you have to have that opportunity to provide and receive input.
All right, thank you. We're going to bring it back to the Attorney General candidates. Joey, I'm going to have you, Elizabeth, I'm going to have you ask the question here, if you could. And again, if you would, direct the question first to Mr. Brockler.
All right, Mr. Brockler, what actions by the federal government would fall into your definition of overreach? Abortion, environmental laws, etc.
You have 1.5 minutes, sir.
First off, I think the Attorney General plays a pretty pivotal role in protecting Colorado's sovereignty and our ability to govern ourselves. I've got 2 good examples for you. Under the last administration, through an EPA rule concocted by bureaucrats 1,500 miles from here, something called Waters of the United States was sought to be imposed on top of Colorado, which would have hijacked about 93% of the jurisdiction over our precious water, maybe our most precious resource. It was incumbent upon the Attorney General's office to push back on that and seek to retain control over those waters through a simple definitional change that the EPA wanted to force on us through a law they couldn't get passed by Congress because it was too radical. But under this administration, I tell you too, I was not a fan of Amendment 64. I didn't support it, but 55% of us put it in the Constitution. And as a prosecutor for 1 million Coloradans, I shifted to the idea of defending and supporting the spirit of that law while protecting us from all the ills that flow from it, and that includes our burgeoning black market marijuana grows. But despite our local attempts to regulate recreational marijuana, we have heard more and more about a federal government that may want to come in over the top of us and impose its will on us on this issue in which we have decided how to govern ourselves. And as Attorney General, I will push back on that too. I care not which party has the White House. I care not who's there. I'm not here to protect anyone's legacy. I'm here to protect the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weiser, if you'd like to speak directly to Amendment 64 and the overreach of the DOJ that some argue, or other areas, where do you feel that your office, you individually, must push back?
I have a simple test. Is the federal government doing something that's illegal, and does that action hurt Colorado? Unfortunately, right now, there are several examples. This is a point of disagreement between the two of us. One that I've heard about again and again is the Affordable Care Act, which protects people with pre-existing conditions. And I've talked to people who this protection, it's a matter of life and death for their kids. It's what's protecting them from bankruptcy. This is unthinkable to me. A law passed by Congress, upheld by the Supreme Court, not being defended and enforced by the Federal Department of Justice. We have a choice here in Colorado. We can have an Attorney General who protects us, who stands up for people with pre-existing conditions. That's number one. Number two, on the census, it is the case that the Constitution, I clerked at the Supreme Court for Justice White and Justice Ginsburg, both of whom said, carry a copy with you. You never know when you need it. Here's what the constitutional clause says. We need to do an actual enumeration of the whole population, including everyone. But right now our federal government is trying to ask the question for political purposes, whether about your immigration status, to intimidate people not to be counted. That'll hurt Colorado. It'll hurt our money that we get from the federal government. It'll hurt our representation. I'll stand up for Colorado. And finally, on key protections of our land, air, and water that are being taken down without adequate justification, I'll stand up for our land, air, and water to protect Colorado.
Just want to follow up real quick with let's try to keep the applause down. You're taking time away from your candidates. Just throwing that out there. We say that every debate, so there you go. All right. Just putting it out there. Do want to follow up, though, because a lot of people look at, well-intentioned prosecutors to push back against the Department of Justice. That costs Colorado taxpayers money. Where do you draw the line? Both gentlemen, I want to get your reaction to that about budgeting to push back against the federal government. Would that money be better served in other areas? Mr. Weiser, I'll start with you. You have a minute. Talk to that expense. And this litigation could go on forever.
It doesn't go on forever. Decisions happen, and the decisions that are happening in many of these cases is to declare action by the federal government illegal. Often, Colorado is participating with other states who share the concern, meaning we're not spending a lot of our attorney time doing it. It takes a little bit, for sure, but the stakes are critical. It's health care. It's protecting our land, air, and water, fair and legal treatment of immigrants. That's what's at stake. And we have a check on the federal government if it acts illegally and hurts us. It's our Attorney General. This is the lawyer to protect the people of Colorado. An Attorney General is not doing his or her job if we're not defending the rule of law when people's lives are at stake. So yes, it might cost a little bit of money, but it's worth it. And I will always, in every single case, ask these two questions. Is the federal government doing something that's illegal? I'm not interested in tilting at windmills. I'm interested in cases that we can win, and that when we win, we've made life better for the people of Colorado.
Mr. Brockler, same question, sir. Again, how do you prioritize pushing back and spending taxpayers' money to litigate some of these overreach cases?
Listen, I trust us in this room a lot more to govern ourselves on issues of importance than I do bureaucrats 1,500 miles from here, and yet more and more we find a federal government, regardless of who's in charge of the White House, seeking to dictate to us how to live our lives. Now, this choice here, and to answer your question, really comes down to, are we going to have an attorney general or are we going to have an activist? Now, an activist finds the federal law they like and says, I will fight and defend this one. And we can call it the Affordable Care Act. But an activist also says, well, I don't like the federal immigration law, so I will carve out part of the office to figure out a way to push back against the federal immigration law. I am not here to defend any federal law. I'm here to defend the state of Colorado. But let me say this. That Obamacare, I wasn't a supporter of it, but it was congressionally passed, presidentially signed, and Supreme Court approved. And I think it's incumbent upon the U.S. Attorney General to have to defend that law whether we like it or not.
Thank you. Move to our treasurer candidates. Joey Bunch, you have the question for our candidates, sir.
I do. As the state's banker, what's your position on Amendment 74, which would require local and state governments to compensate people if their property has lost value because of regulation? What's your position?
We're going to start with Mr. Watson. You have a minute and a half, sir.
Yeah. So I'm against Amendment 74, mainly because it puts a very large tax burden on the people of Colorado. You know, we're all paying a whole lot more money right now for a lot of things. Life's gotten a lot more expensive. And before we give more money to our government, I think we need to make sure that the government is a good steward of what we've entrusted them with. You know, I came from very humble means on the western slope of Colorado. I started my company 18 years ago. And as an entrepreneur, I have to figure out every day how to become better, smarter, and faster. But our government is not doing that. And so because I believe in stewardship, one of my campaign pledges is not to take a salary from the government when elected. And I'm doing that because I want to do my part to try to reduce the cost and burden of government. I'm a big believer in education and creating great educational environments. So I like the premise of some of these amendments and things that are being done. But before we spend more money, let's make sure that government is being efficient. Let's make sure that it's truly representing the people. You know, one of the first things I'm going to do when elected state treasurer of Colorado is to go in the office and ask the people a very simple question. Who is our customer? Because some people believe it's lobbyists and other politicians and things like that. For me, in the office that I will run and commit to you, you are the customer, and the people of Colorado should be served every single day.
Thank you. Mr. Young, again, you heard the question from Joey. You have a minute and a half, sir.
Well, thank you. I am also against Amendment 74 for similar reasons. I believe it's going to present a very serious burden on taxpayers across the state. But I come at it from a different point of view. I've been a member of the Joint Budget Committee for the past 4 years. I've been a representative for the Greeley area for the past 7. And I've had a deep experience and deep understanding of the complexities of the state of Colorado and its finances. And this experience has actually informed me that we have a financial crisis in the state of Colorado that we need to sort out. We have a crisis in the state of Colorado when it comes to K-12 education funding. We've cost shifted our finance problem on higher education to the backs of students and their families on higher tuition and force them to take loans out. So this kind of an amendment, in fact, creates problems for people across the state, and it really puts a burden on them when we already have a pretty significant burden facing them funding these funding crises that we have. I'm ready to start day one because of my experiences as a legislator and particularly on the Joint Budget Committee. I am ready to begin working on the problems that face us as a state and work with leaders and others across the state and our taxpayers to ensure that we're actually moving our state forward and investing right here in Colorado so that we can move our state along.
I want to do a quick follow-up for both of you, just 30 seconds really. What tweaks, if any, as it exists now in terms of the ability to sue when these types of circumstances occur, would you favor? Do we need to move forward in some different way? Mr. Watson, I'll start with you. Not perhaps as far, obviously you believe that 74 goes too far, but is there some tweaking to that ability for people to find recourse legally in these circumstances?
Well, that may be a question better for the Attorney General candidates, but I'm not an attorney. I'm a business person and a private sector person who wants to serve in government. But I always believe that we should empower the people to bring forth their cases as they see fit. And so if that's allowed, so be it. But again, a lot of these issues, they do resolve in our state legislature, and we need to make sure we have the spine to address these issues. These are not issues that are just going to go away by ignoring them or kicking the can down the road. I really want to see great leadership, again, representing the people of Colorado.
Mr. Young?
Well, thank you. I actually had an experience of working in this area in the 2 sessions ago. I carried a bill on forced pooling that was designed to actually give our property rights owners more power to understand the process of takings that they might be involved in. And so what we wanted to do is increase notification, increase the number of people required in a forced pooling situation to actually have their rights upheld, and actually make the language plain when they receive the documentation to ensure that they really understand what's happening. That bill didn't pass that session, but I actually come from Weld County, and it turns out that the 5 Republican county commissioners were in favor of it, as well as CCI and commissioners across the state. So I was proud to carry that, and a very similar bill actually passed the next session. So I think it is a legislative solution that can be found, and I've been in the middle of working on it.
Joey, go ahead.
A quick answer. I'm not good with money or math, and I don't have to count very high for either one of them. But help me understand this. What's the impact of 74? You know, what's the worst case scenario, and how do we pay for it? Where does the money come from?
Let's start with Mr. Watson. You have a minute.
It's a basically doubling of your taxes, and it would add on $1.6 billion of additional tax revenue. So again, I think we're all paying a whole lot already, and we're just trying to make ends meet. If anyone has been a part of our campaign, I talk a lot about dining room table economics, right? We're all sitting down at the dining room table trying to just make ends meet. And Colorado's gotten a whole lot more expensive. And so again, before we start doubling taxes, before we start going to the taxpayer, let's make sure government is being a good steward of what we've entrusted them with. And then as they are a better steward with that, then we can talk about tax increases from there. But that shouldn't be the first well that the government always goes to, is the people just asking you to continue to write checks on their empty promises.
Thank you. Dave, go ahead.
Well, I'm a little confused. I'm wondering, are you referring to Amendment 74? Okay, Amendment 74 is different than I think what my opponent was referring to in Amendment 73. As I mentioned, I have deep experience in the state's finances and the budget, and your question is, where does the money come from? We don't have the ability to raise taxes as a legislature. That is only done by the vote of the people under Tabor. And in fact, there is a conflict in our Constitution with Gallagher
Well,
Amendment.
I think, excuse me just a second, I think, Joey, the point he's making is if this passes, what's the downside? Yeah, I mean, I think that more so the process, just it's more about what's the result of this if it does happen. Am I correct in that, Joey?
That's correct.
Well, thank you for clarifying. And in fact, I think in my earlier comments, I mentioned that we have a deep hole in every aspect of the budget. So if we have to go in and find more money in the current budget in order to figure out how to pay this bill, I will tell you right now, it's going to create chaos in the state of Colorado as far as K-12 education is concerned, our transportation system, healthcare, higher education. Every aspect of the budget would be very dramatically impacted in a very negative way.
Thank you. Moving on to our Secretary of State candidates, and this is a general question. We are going to begin with Mr. Williams, and the question is, in the Trump era, confidence in voter registration and voting has taken a beating from every political quarter. Are those concerns fair, do you believe? What's your plan to counter it? What have you done as Secretary of State to address those concerns? You have a minute and a half.
Thank you very much. I think there are concerns. There was a recent NPR Marist poll that said 32% of the people believe that a foreign nation will change election results in the United States in 2018. I have taken this head on. As the Secretary of State for Colorado, I adopted new election standards that require a voter verifiable paper ballot with respect to every vote that's cast. I then added the nation's first full risk-limiting audit, where we compare the way the paper ballot was cast with the actual cast vote record from the voting machine, the tabulation machine. So that's why we can tell you in Colorado that nobody in Moscow and nobody in Beijing and nobody anywhere else in the world changed a single vote in the state of Colorado. I think conveying to people the importance of the security precautions we've done has helped us significantly address this issue. Colorado has the highest percentage of registered voters in America. We have the highest percentage of people voting because of the confidence in our system and the ease that we've made it to vote. And I'm proud of that record and happy to address those issues. As a Secretary of State, in fact, I was just speaking in Washington, D.C. with the Bipartisan Policy Center with the Democratic Secretary of State for New Mexico, talking about the things we are doing to ensure the preparation for the 2018 election.
Thank you. Ms. Griswold, again, the question is, confidence in voter registration, and are those concerns fair? What's your plan, and as you see Mr. Williams operate that office, what concerns do you have moving forward?
Well, I think the concerns are fair, and I think President Trump stokes them himself. He said that millions of people voted illegally without a shred of proof. I think Wayne agrees that there wasn't 5 million illegal votes casted in 2016. And I think it's really important that the Secretary of State makes prudent decisions when interacting under that type of leadership from the federal level. And I announced my candidacy right when my opponent sent our voter data to the Trump administration, Trump's voter commission. It was being ran by someone with a long and ugly history of disenfranchising hundreds of thousands of people. It was sued for federal overreach, and there was no guarantee that our voter data would be stored in a secure server. So I think the leadership has to come from the Secretary of State. I won't play for President Trump when he wants to create havoc and chill the democratic process in Colorado. I will stand up for the people of Colorado. I have no problem filing an injunction and saying, hey, this is federal overreach. There's all these lawsuits. Let's let the judiciary figure out what's going on. Along those lines, our election systems have to work in Colorado. And we have a statewide voter registration system that has to work in real time on election day. The problem is it generally does not. It has gone down in Colorado, 2010, 2014, 2016, and when it goes down, it causes 2 to 3 hour lines in some voting locations. Now, that's not because of Russian cyber attack or anything like that, but when people go to vote, the systems have to work so that voter confidence remains strong.
Okay, I'm going to have Mr. Williams, you'd like to respond to those are some hard accusations about how this process works. We all watch it. We know there are problems on Election Day. Again, your reaction to what you just heard. You have 1 minute, sir.
Sure. Let me address both of the issues. First, with respect to publicly available voter data files. These are files that anyone in the state or nation can get. It is a simple request. We have 3 days as a general rule under the Colorado Open Records Law to comply with the request. I think you want a Secretary of State that complies with the law. And that's true whether you like who's requesting the data or particularly if you don't like, because that's really where the push comes in the respect of this office. Do you respect everyone's opportunity to obtain the same data whether you like them or not? And that's what my office did. No private information was given, only publicly available. We have fixed the issues that occurred. Several of those were before my time as Secretary of State. The last 2 elections have worked flawlessly, and that is, I think, what you have to do as a Secretary of State is address the issues as they come up, be prepared for others. The fact that we adopted all of these security standards before other people thought they mattered illustrates the type of preparation we're making.
Thank you. Back to our Attorney General candidates, and Elizabeth, your question for our candidates.
Would you pursue a lawsuit against the federal government to prevent the separation of immigrant families?
And yes, Mr. Weiser, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds, sir.
My test is simple. Is the federal government acting illegally? Does it hurt Colorado? We in Colorado care about immigrants, want them treated fairly, and we believe in asylum for appropriate cases. A lot of asylum seekers come to Aurora, one of the most diverse and welcoming cities in the U.S. But right now, some of those asylum seekers are not able to come, and they're not given due process of law, which is what the Constitution requires we afford everyone, including persons seeking asylum. That violation of the law and that harm to Colorado and our interest in welcoming refugees the way my family was welcomed, because my grandparents and my mom survived the Holocaust and came to this nation as refugees and were welcomed and were given due process of law. When a federal government is willing to act illegally, we don't just say, oh, it's awful that Jeff Sessions is separating families at the border or not enforcing the Affordable Care Act. We turn to our lawyer, the lawyer for the people, who has the authority to do something about it. And I would do something about it, because we in Colorado believe in the rule of law. We believe in treating people fairly, both those seeking asylum and those who have pre-existing conditions. This race is about whether the lawyer will do something about it. I will as your Attorney General.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brockler, again, the question, would you pursue a lawsuit against the federal government to prevent the separation of immigrant families?
Yeah, my test is the only test for an attorney, especially one that represents the state, and that is, do you have standing to file a lawsuit? Is there a colorable claim on behalf of the state of Colorado? Are you out there as an ideological Don Quixote tilting at every partisan windmill that's out there? Look, the bottom line is this. If there are families being separated in Colorado, that might be something we want to take a look at, and that's coming from a kid who is the son of a first-generation American. It makes my stomach hurt to think about a government that separates children from their parents. I've got one of mine right here. It would make me crazy to see the government separate them. But to suggest that our Attorney General's office will be converted into some other lawsuit machine to take on administration with which we disagree over every issue, whether it occurs within the borders of the state or not, that's not an Attorney General. That's an activist. And I intend to be an Attorney General.
Mr. Weiser. I believe he just referred to you as an activist and a lawsuit machine, or at least pursue that. You have a minute, sir, to respond to Mr. Brockler. I've been referred to as an iced tea drinking machine before,
but not a lawsuit machine. Let's talk about the law. George has made a legal statement. Does Colorado have standing to bring the lawsuit? That case is litigated right now on behalf of other states who have joined this litigation, like Washington. The answer, they have standing. If you're a state who wants to welcome asylum seekers, you have an interest in the asylum process working as the law requires. We in Colorado welcome asylum seekers and have a vested interest. I'm actively committed to fighting for the people of Colorado. And when the federal government hurts Coloradans, hurts what we care about, I'll be an Attorney General who'll fight for the people of Colorado. I won't sit back and just wait for us to get sued. I'll lean in and say, how can I advance our interests, even against the federal government, when they act illegally in ways that hurt us? And we would have standing here. We just have an AG right now who's not acting on the people's behalf.
So Mr. Brockler, a fair rebuttal there? Your response. You have a minute.
Look, it's only fair if you're looking for excuses to use state power to accomplish something else. Look, as the only guy in this race who's actually filed a lawsuit, who's actually had a client in the state of Colorado that has dictated to me their interests, and I look out for them within the confines of the law, not every good idea fairy that's out there. I'm here to, and I'm, by the way, as the DA for Aurora, the most diverse city in the country outside of Brooklyn, New York, I'm here to tell you that my decision making is going to start with, what does the law permit? Do I have a client that will be best served by this? Not by trying to stretch the boundaries of jurisdiction so that I can file lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit to thwart a federal immigration policy that Congress should be fixing.
Thank you. Back to our candidates for state treasurer, and this is a...
Oh, Rob, I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, yes.
Based on what I just heard, I'd like to ask a philosophical question of you two. Because I'm hearing a lot of talk about politics tonight, and maybe that's because we've got an election coming up. But I think a lot of Americans are concerned about the Supreme Court and the political influence of the court system. And I'm starting to worry about, and if I'm on the wrong side of politics, am I also on the wrong side of the law? Are you guys going to adequately represent members who aren't, or people who aren't in your party?
Let's start with Mr. Weiser. You have a minute and a half, sir.
Joe, you're right. We witnessed recently the statement that the federal Justice Department should only prosecute people of the party not in power. We witnessed one of the more polarized Supreme Court nominations we've seen. We in Colorado have to rise above this. I was just talking about what Lincoln said in his second inaugural address, with malice towards none and charity towards all. We need more empathy in our politics. I want to spend as much time with people I don't agree with as with people I do. What Roy Romer always taught was that all truth is partial. None of us see all of the truth, whether we're talking about immigration, oil and gas, or consumer protection. As an Attorney General, it's my job to represent all the people, to accumulate all the ideas about how we in Colorado have a rule of law system that is fair, that's effective, and that builds trust. And that only comes from a commitment to listen to everybody. We need more of that in our politics. We in Colorado can be a model for the nation about what democracy looks like. And that's why I want to be your Attorney General.
Mr. Brockler, again, the politics of politics, working together, coalition building, your response as far as that office is concerned.
Yeah, listen, I think we can talk a lot about the high-minded philosophy stuff. We can talk about the things that we have done with the massive discretion that we have in our positions that highlight that. Now, my expectation is, with that bell going off behind me, that every single person running for a state office ought to be asked, when have you stood up to your party because you thought it was the right thing to do? And I've done it every single year I've been in office. Google me and something called red flag. I have also been the district attorney who cares not who works for me in terms of party. The number 2 guy in my office is a Democrat. The number 3 person is an unaffiliated person. I think the other thing to know is that it is a partisan process to become a district attorney. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, just like for Attorney General. But once you're elected, there are no Republican victims. There are no Democrat constituents. There are only Coloradans who are entitled to equal protection under the law and the due process of that law when the government moves against them. That's not theoretical for me. I don't have to tell you what I will do when I'm in office because I've been doing it every single day that I have been in office. The issue for an Attorney General for the state of Colorado shouldn't be what is your policy issue on this or that going to be? How will you take on this Republican president or that Democrat president? The only issue should be, will you stand up and defend our laws and our Constitution, whether you agree with them or not? And that has been my entire career.
Thank you. Let's move to our treasurer candidates again, and the Great Colorado Payback. We're going to talk about that. It's always in the headlines for better or worse. The bottom line is it reunites rightful owners with lost cash or property, if you're not familiar with this. Though complaints have mounted about its bureaucratic pace, do you have a plan to improve response time to complaints? Let's start there. And I do want to start with Mr. Young. You have a minute and a half, sir.
Very good. Thanks for the question. This has been a big problem. The Great Colorado Payback is not so great, and we need to fix it. I think there have been some immediate steps that have been taken in the last year or two to implement technology that will improve that response time, but I think more needs to be done. Frankly, what's happened is that there have been lots of ads, TV, and print that have alerted people of the fact that they have property or money in the unclaimed property trust fund. The problem is they didn't build capacity in the office in order to be able to respond to that many claims that were being put in. So it's incumbent upon the next treasurer, and I stand ready from day one in order to do this work, that we realign the jobs within the office. About half of the personnel in the treasurer's office are involved with this particular activity. And we may have to temporarily add some more people from other parts of that department, or add even temporarily some to handle more claims that are coming in, so that people actually know that they have claims being processed. We have counties that actually have money in the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund and have been waiting for some time to get it back. I don't know why that is, but on day one, I will be reuniting property with the counties that have that money there or that property there. It's going to take some concerted work. We have an audit going on. I will work in concert with the audit in order to make sure that we're doing it right.
Mr. Young, thank you. Mr. Watson, the Colorado Bay Payback Program, addressing its complaints, the backlog, what's your vision in terms of money, manpower to improve the return for these folks that deserve that money, frankly?
Absolutely. So to give you a little context, our state has over $1.3 billion of the people's money. My opponent and his cohorts have already pre-committed over $500 million of the people's money to other government spending items. So we need a state treasurer who's going to go in there and say, you know what, this isn't the state's money. This is the people of Colorado's money, and to fight every single day to return it to their rightful owners. As I said before, the first thing I'm going to do in going to that state treasurer's office is make sure we all understand who our customer is, make sure they understand that it's the people of Colorado, and to figure out how we can become better, smarter, faster every single day to get those assets returned to their rightful owners. And I'm going to do that before I say, let's just go hire more people, because that's the government solution, right? Let's just go hire more people and continue to grow. Well, let's figure out how we can become more efficient with the resources that we have, and let's streamline that process. You know, it's been actually heartbreaking for me. During my campaign, I've had multiple people reach out to me and say, Mr. Watson, I've tried to be collect about $500 to $1,000, whoever it might be, from the state government, and it's roadblock after roadblock after roadblock for over a year. That is wrong, and it's unconscionable. So we need to figure out, how do we streamline that? Government shouldn't be another roadblock for the people. The government should be there for the people and to be serving them every single day. And that's the mindset, a fresh, new outsider's perspective that I'm going to bring to that state treasurer's office.
And if you could, give us one example, if you could, of how you would streamline that process.
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, making sure we understand who our customer is, but also making it a fun process. Yes, we need to make sure we do a diligent, conservative process of how we do this, but let's actually get the assets back to the people. So number one, let's make sure people know about it and communicate about it, and make sure that they could be affected. Make sure that the online system is streamlined. Let's make sure that when they actually make a claim, there's someone there to handle it and to verify if they're the owner, and figure out how we can streamline that process to get those assets back to them, instead of just continuing to roadblock. Because is the government trying to block you from it so it can go spend more of your money? Well, it's already spent over $500 million of your money. So on the current route, that's what they're going to continue to do.
Mr. Young, I'd like to have you give you a minute just to talk about, give us an example of how you see it being streamlined. Advertising, more engagement with the people owed money, getting that money back that's being put into different agencies, etc. Talk to us about that. You have a minute.
Thank you. And I have heard the same kinds of stories out on the campaign trail, people not being able to be reunited with their property in a timely fashion. But there are a lot of people, I think, that don't even know that they have property in the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund. We need to be more proactive as a treasurer's office in finding those people, reaching out to them, communicating with them, and making sure, in fact, that they know that they have property there. We ran into one woman who had been in a car accident in Grand Junction and discovered, in fact, that she had money because we informed her along the campaign trail that she had money sitting there that she thought she had lost as a claim from her car accident. And this is heartbreaking because it really caused her financial distress. So step one is being more proactive, not just TV ads and not just ads in print, but actually identifying people. And nowadays on the internet, you can actually identify them and find phone numbers and email addresses and reach out to them and let them know that they have property there.
Thank you. I'm going to move to our Secretary of State candidates. Elizabeth, you have the next question.
All right. How concerned are you, and what, as Secretary of State, can and will you do when it comes to campaign finance reform, flushing the dark money out of this system? What do you think has to change here?
And we're going to begin with Jenna. You have a minute and a half.
I'm tremendously concerned about secret political spending. I think it's crippling our democracy. And we have campaign finance laws because in a democracy, people deserve to know who's trying to influence the outcome of campaigns and how they're trying to do it. So the Secretary of State oversees campaign finance. And I want to take a real active role in making sure that our campaign finance laws don't have loopholes. They currently do. So I'd like to work with the state legislature to make sure that we're stopping secret political spending, that people are disclosed, that the definition of electioneering is extended adequately from the primary. There's a loophole right now where the electioneering definition doesn't cover primary until 60 days before the general election. Did you all know that in Colorado, if I sent you a pamphlet that says vote for me, I don't have to put paid by my campaign? I want to make sure people have the facts. So let's close loopholes. Let's give more information. And then as Secretary of State, I want to make sure we're auditing campaign finance filings. And I know that doesn't sound like the most exciting thing in the world. Oh, she wants to go audit things. But that's how we make sure that foreign money isn't coming in. That's how we make sure corporations aren't dumping in money. That's how we make sure quid pro quo is not happening when it comes to secret, deep-pocketed folks or special interests dumping money into our politics. So I believe in a democracy that transparency has to be the top priority, and hope to work for more transparency as Secretary of State.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, same question. Campaign finance reform, flushing out some of this dark money. What have you done? What else needs to be done moving forward? You have a minute and a half, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me start by talking about what we have done. We have worked to address and improve Colorado's campaign finance plan. And instead of sitting back and just saying, it's not my job, we've worked proactively with the legislature. I see Senator Bob Gardner here. He's carried a number of those bills. Those bills that have passed with reforming campaign finance procedures in Colorado passed. They are 2 of the 25 bills my office has successfully passed through a bipartisan way through the legislature, getting support from a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, and signed by a Democratic governor. So we've improved campaign finance systems already in Colorado, but we didn't stop there. When a federal court struck down the constitutional enforcement plan, I met with lawyers from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to adopt new regulations to provide for a quicker and more transparent way of addressing campaign finance issues that have arisen. That got support from both parties, so again, working together to get that done. And then it also makes it a quicker process. So instead of lingering on, we immediately respond. Instead of waiting for an administrative law judge, we immediately contact the campaign and say, please fix this. We have been successful in doing this. It is working much better. The reporting deadline we halved so that you actually get quicker responses and you actually get the transparent disclosures you're supposed to.
Thank you very much. I skipped Joey Bunch. Joey was supposed to ask the last question. That's right here, Joey.
That's okay. I'll start. Would you like me to start with the Attorney General?
Yes, yes, I would. You know, you're reading my mind, my friend. Yes, we're going to go back to our Attorney General candidates, and please, go ahead.
Let's talk about marijuana. 3-part question. Would you defend our industry against the federal government? How could we improve these laws? And can your opponent roll a better doobie than you? Take those in any order you'd like.
What's a doobie?
The Doobie Brothers.
Ah, that's the doobies I know.
That's what we're calling you two.
In all seriousness, we are going to begin with Mr. Brockler, a minute and a half. Joey, clarify the question.
A marijuana cigarette.
Yes, I know.
I'll take number 3 first, most unequivocally, I presume. That's true. First 2 things that we should know, though, are that, and I built this into a past answer. Look, I'm all in for Coloradans governing Coloradans. And we've already made a decision, 55% of us, to not legalize marijuana, but to regulate recreational marijuana. And I'm invested in protecting the will of the people of the state of Colorado. And so all of those things that grow out of this, when you talk about the black market marijuana growth, that is an assault on the will of the people of the state of Colorado who said, this isn't going to be the Wild West of weed. This is going to be a regulated market. And so the approach we've taken in a jurisdiction with a ton of resources, and that's my 1,000,000-person jurisdiction, is to aggressively tackle black market marijuana growth. Just recently, We had a huge bust across Arapahoe County, executing something like 27 separate search warrants for upper middle class homes where 1,100 plants were taken out of some of those homes. That's how you enforce the will of the people of the state of Colorado from the criminal element, and you resist the federal government when they seek to impose their will over the top of us. Now, you asked me how best to prove this, and I have been looking at this issue now for almost a quarter century. From a prosecutor standpoint, defense attorney standpoint, the greatest weakness in our system, it's not those businesses that I've toured, it's not the CEOs that I've met with, it's not the MED guys that I've talked with, it's home grows. That is the Achilles heel to this regulated marijuana market, are people that are allowed to grow marijuana virtually unchecked inside their homes. As Attorney General, I'm going to work to stop it.
Thank you. Mr. Weiser, a minute and a half. Again, the three-part question from Joey. You're good to go.
We'll have to find a range of competitions between George and I. That'll be one of the more interesting ones. What I want to focus on first is what we heard last week, which is compliant marijuana businesses can be subject to federal investigations and harassment. That scares me. That's Washington sticking its nose where it doesn't belong, citing concerns about a black market that we need to address appropriately, but not by harassing businesses that are compliant. And let me pick up a critical point here. You mentioned earlier, Joey, about regulatory law. What we've done with marijuana is to say we're going to regulate it. One critical issue, making sure kids don't get access to marijuana. I'll work hard on that issue. Another critical issue, making sure our regulatory system has the right background music. Sorry. Making sure that our regulatory system is fair, accessible, and transparent. Because a lot of entrepreneurs in this space right now who are here in Colorado are concerned that our system's not keeping up. I've got an expertise in regulatory law, which is a lot of what our Attorney General's office needs to do. And if our system pushes out entrepreneurs to other countries or other states, we lose our first mover advantage. Part of what we did in legalizing marijuana is turn something that was a dumb focus of criminal justice, putting marijuana users in jail, and create an engine for economic opportunity. I want to make sure we keep that.
Thank you.
If I may, I've got a follow-up question. Do we have the law enforcement mechanisms to find the cheaters in the marijuana system?
Let's start with Mr. Brockler. You have a minute.
I think we're starting to. And we're starting to see some of that marijuana tax money, which, by the way, ain't nobody knows where that stuff goes, right? I mean, we need a website called where'smypottaxmoney.com so you can see where it's all going. Well, we start to see some of this money coming in the form of grants. The problem is that money can't sustain a task force that can go tackle the black market marijuana approach that we've taken here out in the rurals, like Huerfano County, one of the poorest per capita counties around. We don't have the ability to do that. But I do want to comment on this. I've only been doing this 24 years. We have not been jailing people for possession of usable amounts of marijuana. You'd have to smoke marijuana at your sentencing hearing, blow the smoke in the judge's face, and even then, it was an open question. What we have always done is take a proactive, progressive approach that has a libertarian bent to it to trying to regulate things that put us at risk. And let's make no mistake, no matter what we do to enforce the regulatory marijuana market, there is a greater risk to our kids out there. That came with the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Weiser?
First, as to the criminal justice system of marijuana, talk to those people with records today for using or selling marijuana. Let's see about expunging those records. Because we've decided it's not a crime anymore. People who were punished for it, we need to give them the opportunity of not having that on their record. And as for tools, we need more tools, creative ones, to make sure that these regulatory approaches that keep marijuana away from kids, that has proper labeling, and make sure it's used properly and not into the black market, we've got to work on that. That's a creative challenge, the sort of creative regulatory challenge I've worked on over my career, including in 2 administrations and in the White House. This is what we in Colorado can do. Be a model for the nation on marijuana, on water, on oil and gas. These are hard problems. We can face them together.
Mr. Brockler, quickly, about expunging the records, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, look, right now we have a vehicle for that. It's called a pardon, that a governor with guts has the ability to use as often as they'd like to, based on almost any standards that they set. The problem with taking the approach that now that we have legalized a certain element of previously criminal conduct is that it doesn't take into consideration things like plea bargains off of larger cases. And I'm telling you this, it is one thing to have been convicted of possessing usable amounts of marijuana. It is another thing to be a drug dealer and to be a distributor of a controlled substance. That can't be a matter of automation. It can't be a matter of mandate. That has to be an individual case review process. And whether we change the law or not, you should know the governor can do it right now without any further incentive from us. This is a big deal. Criminal justice reform matters to me in a big way. I have written op-ed pieces about it and published in the Washington Times. I've talked about it with the NAACP in front of groups. This piece right here is important, but it's not fixable with a mandated automatic law.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you had a follow-up.
Right. This is, you were talking about protecting the kids, and one thing that we keep covering is vaping and juuling, and that's the next big thing, you know, the big tobacco thing. All these kids are becoming addicted to vaping and juuling. Is there anything that you could do in our state to protect our state's kids from that?
Start with Mr. Weiser. You have a minute.
The important role of an attorney general is to realize all the tools you do have. Consumer education and outreach are critical tools. We need to go to schools and make sure that we're letting people know about the dangers of drug use. And the vaping concern you have is real. Both George and I have teenage daughters. You can pray for both of us. And it's critical that we give parents the tools as well. The challenges we have are how do we make sure that people don't just start using and not realize what happens. And the opioid epidemic is a powerful example of that. It became a party drug, leading to overdoses. We have to be aware, and we have to start with education, and we've got money to do it. We've got to organize it and manage it effectively.
Thank you. Mr. Brockler?
Yeah, look, bottom line is this, and my kids all go to public school. I mean, the public school safety piece matters to me. But what we've failed to do is to defend against this now popular belief that it's just marijuana. That permeates juries when they try to decide whether or not is someone under the influence of marijuana when they go careening down our highways that we can't protect ourselves from. And it permeates our juveniles. They have bought off on the campaign that sold us Amendment 64 that marijuana is somehow harmless, and it is not. I was told the black market would go away when we passed Amendment 64. We know it's only been professionalized. We know that instead of low-potency street swag sold behind the 7-Eleven down the street, it's this incredibly potent, having nearly psychedelic impacts on kids' minds. My concern is, if you don't arm law enforcement with more tools to punish those who give marijuana to our kids outside the law, we're going to have a generation of Jeff Spicolis from Fast Times at Ridgemont High before we figure out what we've done wrong here. As your Attorney General, I will continue to fight to protect your kids and mine.
Thank you. Quickly, I did want to mention, I do know where some of the marijuana profits are going in Pueblo County. It's actually funding about 500 scholarships for kids. I just want to throw that out there. So there is some accounting in a very positive way. Our friends in Pueblo viewing tonight, plan to give them a shout out. So anyway. Okay, moving on again to our treasurer candidates here. And
are you sure? Because I thought this was just going to be Phil and I the rest of the night.
Well, I didn't get to answer the other question, so I yielded to my time.
Moving on to our treasurer candidates, we're running out of time, so we need to move this forward a little bit. Tabor, always an issue, every election cycle. I'm going to start with Mr. Watson. What measures, reviews need to take place regarding Tabor, its formula of population growth, inflation, to determine how much money the state can keep? Is it in good shape, in your view, right now? Does something need to change in terms of the formula, or just doing away with Tabor altogether? You have a minute and a half.
So as a resident of Colorado and someone that owns commercial real estate assets in 16 states throughout America, I have to say I'm very thankful for Tabor and what has done to Colorado. You know, so many of these states have just gone on a spending spree, and that's why so many people are fleeing other states and coming to Colorado, because at least from a government spending perspective, at least it's kept in somewhat of check. My opponent has made comments that he doesn't like Tabor and would like to see it diminished. I believe the government should be constrained, and if the government wants to spend more money, it should come to us, the people of Colorado, and ask us for approval, because otherwise it will just continue to run off the tracks. In terms of the mechanisms where we are right now, you know, there is an issue that's brewing when you look at Tabor and you look at the Gallagher Amendment and some other things that are impeding Colorado. One of my concerns is that right now we have a very strong economy in most areas in Colorado, yet our government still doesn't have enough money to do what it wants to do. If you can't figure it out in this economy, what's going to happen if the economy goes down again? And eventually it will. There's a natural law of gravity. What goes up eventually comes down. And so we need to make sure we're very good stewards, properly planning, and making sure that we keep the people of Colorado and those dining room table economics at the forefront of every single conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Young, you have a minute and a half. Your perspective on Tabor as we see it today.
Absolutely. Tabor has been around since 1992. The Gallagher Amendment that actually dealt with exploding residential property taxes came in 1982. The two of them were never designed to work together, and they've been in our Constitution for quite a while. I think it's time, because Colorado is a lot different now than it was in 1982 and 1992, to take a good hard look at how those two amendments interact. They aren't working for us, they're working against us. My opponent has just said that the economy is serving the entire state or most of the state well. I can test that. I come from a rural county and have lived in that rural county for most of my adult life. The economy is struggling in many parts of rural Colorado. If you don't have a resort in your mountain town, you have trouble with funding your schools. And the same is true down in the valley and on the eastern plains. So we need to actually work together to figure out how we can get Tabor and Gallagher to work for us instead of against us, so we can move our state forward. Yes, we have a hot economy. We see it going like gangbusters here from Colorado Springs up to Fort Collins. But we need to have an economy that works for everybody in the state of Colorado. And I'm committed to actually work with everyone in the state of Colorado to make that happen.
Thank you. We have time for one more question for our Secretary of State candidates. Joey, I believe you're up.
Well, elections get all the attention in the Secretary of State's office, but you guys have a vital role in helping small businesses. Wayne, tell us what you've done, and Ms. Griswold, tell us what you will do to help small businesses in Colorado.
And we'll start with Mr. Williams. You have a minute and a half.
So we've done a number of things to make it easier for businesses. First, we've put as much as possible online. Today, you can file as a nonprofit online in ways you could not do before, as a business in ways you could not do before. We've also, by the way, the office doesn't get tax dollars. We run entirely on fees. So we've kept those fees very low. In fact, I've slashed fees. Our business renewal fee, the primary fee, at $10 is the cheapest in the nation. So we've done that. As a result of these changes, we've helped 100,000 new businesses get started here in Colorado. But that's not all. I worked with Governor John Hickenlooper to adopt mybiz.colorado.gov. So now, instead of having to go to each of the state agencies separately, you can go to a single site that walks you through not just my process, but also Department of Revenue, Department of Labor and Employment. So making it easier for businesses than ever before in Colorado. We also answer the phone. So I had a wonderful letter from the San Luis Valley Animal Welfare League telling us that they appreciate having things available online, but they said something unique for government. They said, when we call, you answer, and your staff is, and I quote, invariably helpful and cheerful. That's not something every government can say.
Thank you. Jenna, you have a minute and a half.
The Secretary of State's employees are wonderful, and I do think Wayne has taken big steps in the right direction when it comes to helping small businesses. But I think there's more that we can do. You know, I grew up very working class. I'm the first person in my family to go to four-year college and then law school, and I own a small business. And one of the things that I know is true is that you don't know what you don't know. So say you start your business for a first time and you say, okay, I might need an LLC, I might need a business entity. You find your way to the Secretary of State's page, and it's easy to register a business. But you might not know that MyBiz Colorado is sitting out there on another page. You might not know that there's workman's comp you have to opt in or opt out, all the local regulations, unemployment insurance. All that has to be streamlined right where you register your business so that every Coloradan, when they're opening their business for the first time, really has the tools they need to succeed. And that's what I would hope to do as Secretary of State. Along those lines, I do believe that this office and this election comes down to leadership. And when we're talking about the election sphere of the Secretary of State, I believe it's the Secretary of State's duty to make it easier for eligible people to vote. And look, my opponent has executed the laws. He's fought against proposals that make it easier. Universal mail-in ballot. The fact that you receive a universal mail-in ballot, Wayne fought against. Same-day voter registration. Sorry, there was a text message out there. And I would say he fought against the DHS resources that helped us secure our cyber and provided cyber resources after our elections were targeted. I plan to take a different approach and make sure that we're fighting for Coloradans, making sure eligible people can vote, and fighting to double down on our cybersecurity in elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Had to give her a few more seconds, you know. I mean, the message. And, you know, I forgot to tell you to turn your cell phones off, people. That's mine right here. Anyway, thank you all. We had an opportunity to get as many questions in as we can. We didn't have any opening statement, but we are going to have a closing statement from each of the candidates, 2 minutes each. So we're going to start where we end where we started. And so I flipped a coin earlier. There's the coin right there to prove my worth, and we're going to start with the Attorney General candidates. Mr. Weiser, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you all for being a core part of our democracy. We need informed, engaged citizens to understand the differences that different candidates will bring. Your lawyer gets to exercise a lot of discretion. Does your lawyer sue local governments, or does your lawyer work with local governments? Does your lawyer protect your access to health care or sit on the sidelines? Does your lawyer take on pharmaceutical companies who lie to people, causing the opioid epidemic, and bring home a settlement to bring more drug treatment? Those are important questions. I want to be your Attorney General because I believe that my experience working in the Justice Department, spearheading consumer protection cases, at the Supreme Court on important issues of constitutional law, here in Colorado, the University of Colorado Law School, as a professor and as the dean, we've got a range of challenges, and I believe, whether it's marijuana, oil and gas, or water, we can get through them together. And we need an Attorney General who leans in to work on these issues, bringing all the tools in the office. We've talked about them. Sometimes it's bringing a case. I've done that. Sometimes it's working on regulations. Sometimes it's legislation. Sometimes it's making sense of the laws we have. This is hard work, and there are 500 people in the office, and what we need is someone who brings initiative and innovation and energy and a commitment to protecting people. It's the people of Colorado who together need to chart what issues, what values we want our lawyer to lead on. I've put all this on my website, philforcolorado.com, even an easy contrast page to look at what these issues are. And my request of all of you is to show this country what democracy looks like. Respectful discourse, listening, and voters making a decision. Thank you so much for being a part of that. I'd be honored to have your support.
Thank you. Mr. Broccoli, you have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes.
Priorities. Go Buffs, baby. Beat those Trojans. Come on, man. We got to have that today. That's right. I see Kyle wanting to clap. Listen, I'm a Colorado kid. Grew up in middle-class Lakewood. What drew my parents out here from the East Coast all those many decades ago was the promise of opportunity, of family, of community, of personal responsibility.
I got married here. I had all my kids here. I buried my mother here. I am an attorney here, other than my time on active duty for 24 years, standing up and fighting for clients of all kinds on all kinds of legal issues. Everything that's important in my life is within the borders of this state. And when I tell you that I want to be your champion, I want to be the person that defends Colorado and Coloradans from all those who would seek to harm us under our laws, internal and external. I don't say that as a matter of philosophy or perspective thinking. I say that as a matter of my entire history as an attorney in this great state. Now, I'm going to do something crazy here and yield back to you some of this time. But before I do, I want to leave you with this. No team hires as its team captain someone who's never played the sport. No country promotes to its army's general someone who has never seen battle. Even if that general won't pick up a rifle and storm the front lines, they'll be in charge of the ones that do. If you trust me with your vote, if you honor me with your vote, I promise you, you will get my best. And I promise you not to do what I think you want me to do. I will do what you have told me I can do with your laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck. Let's move on to the State Treasurer's Office, and we begin with Mr. Watson. You have 2 minutes.
Well, I want to thank the Elpamar Foundation again, and for each and every one of you showing up, whether in these seats or on the TV. You know, I want to encourage all of you, regardless of your political affiliation, go out and do a job interview and decide who's best for that office, who has the experience. I'm the only statewide candidate that grew up in the Western Slope, in the little town of Olathe, known for its sweet corn. And everything about the Western Slope is in my blood. An appreciation of grit and stewardship and hard work. A love of the outdoors and hunting and fishing and all those wonderful things. In fact, my mascot is my horse Apache. I went to school up in Boulder, go Buffs, and started my company 18 years ago from nothing. And I've been blessed and fortunate in building it up to over $1.3 billion of assets around the country. For almost 2 decades, every single day, I'm looking for the best investment alternatives and try to get the best investment returns for my investors. Well, I want to bring all that business and investment experience to the State Treasurer's Office to make a positive difference, because I really do believe that experience matters. You know, one of the things we didn't talk about tonight was para, and we should, because to me, para should not be a political and partisan issue. It should be a people issue. It's people like my sister, who's a school teacher up in the Boulder Valley School District, and every single day she's working really hard, and she hopes that there's going to be a pension plan for her and for her family. And that not only affects the 600,000 people depending on para, but also all of us in Colorado, because we're spending $230 million a year in interest payments alone on para. We can't afford another career politician looking for the next paid political job. This stuff matters. We need someone who's going to go in there, who's going to figure out how to become better, smarter, faster for government, to remember who the customer is, the people of Colorado, and someone who's going to be a true statesman. I have no desire to be a politician. They're interested in their own skin in the next election. I want to be a statesman, someone who cares about you and is going to have the spine to do something about it. Learn more at brianwatson.vote.
Thank you very much. Dave Young, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. Thank you for your time, and those that are online and watching on TV. This is the democratic process. I am not just a Colorado native, but I'm a Colorado Springs person. I graduated from Mitchell High School, grew up here, and yay Marauders, gotcha. And so it's a pleasure to be back here. Frankly, ended up going up to CSU and getting my undergraduate degree in mathematics, but did go to CU to get my master's degree, so it's all good. I landed a job teaching in 1975 in Greeley. I taught math, science, and technology at a junior high, which was great preparation for the legislature, by the way. And, you know, I love that job. It's heart and soul for me, and it's what I deeply care about. I've had the opportunity now for the past 7 years to be a state representative in Greeley. I've been a voice for rural Colorado, a strong advocate for our seniors, and fought for education funding on a regular basis. But what got me into being a state representative was the fact that I have a sister who's severely disabled. She lives in Pueblo West, but she also grew up here and struggled to find the services that she needed. And I could see that she wasn't the only one that was struggling to get those services. So I actually ran to fix a system that was mistreating our most vulnerable. And that's a big section of the work that I've done in the legislature. I stand ready today, based on the work that I've done in the legislature, and particularly on the Joint Budget Committee, from day one to take charge of the Treasurer's Office. I will be there full-time every day, providing the oversight that is needed in that office. I won't have my attention split because I'm still running another business. I will give my entire full attention to the office, and there's a reason why it's an elected position. You want to be well represented. I have 7 years of representing everyone across the state of Colorado, and I look forward to doing that as your next state treasurer.
Thank you. Finally, our Secretary of State candidates, and General Griswold, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I grew up in rural Colorado, and I grew up very working class. You know, my mom, when we were growing up, would work 2 jobs, and we would still have to go to food banks. So I started working the summer after 7th grade and saw that a lot of Coloradans were struggling. That's why I went to college. That's why I'm the first person in my family to go to a 4-year college. That's why I went to law school. And that's why I know how important it is for every eligible Coloradan to have their voices heard and their vote to count. I believe that the Secretary of State should expand access to voting. That's why I plan to expand automatic voter registration and make sure that we fix that system that causes the 2 to 3 hour lines on election day. As Secretary of State, I won't comply with a sham presidential commission intending on chilling participation in our democracy. I will champion transparency. I think we have to stop secret political spending and make sure that special interests and politicians play by the rules. You know, as the only woman candidate up here, I do want to take a moment to address all the women who were overlooked by Senate Republicans in the confirmation of the Supreme Court new justice. And I want to say, I am proud to be on a ticket of people like Jared Polis, like Phil, like Dave, who believe, unlike Donald Trump, unlike Wayne Williams, and unlike the Republicans up here, in Roe and a woman's choice. I also think that we need to make sure that DC politics does not come to Colorado. I believe that it's unethical that my opponent has undisclosed clients on the side and that he has paid for his bar fees with state funds. I plan to be a full-time Secretary of State working exclusively for the people of Colorado. I think it's time for new leadership and fresh ideas, and I humbly hope and ask for your support coming up here on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wayne Williams, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much to KOAA, to the Gazette, to Elpamar, and because I'm the state's chief election official, Kyle, thank you for all 12 years of service. Regent served 6 years terms. So just to clarify that, thank you to all of you who've spent the time with us today, listening. Hopefully some of you approached it. I know a lot of people already showed up here supporting somebody, but viewers and others, hopefully you've seen some differences and an opportunity for what I've done. Most importantly, I want to thank my wife, Holly, who's sitting in the front row. When I told her 5 years ago I wanted to take a $19,000 pay cut to run for Secretary of State, she was not jumping up and down. Nor was she crazy about the idea that I drive from Colorado Springs to Denver every day. But she's helped support me in that sacrifice, and I very much appreciate that, dear. So let me talk real quick. Lowest business fees in the nation, 100,000 new businesses. Highest percentage of registered voters in the United States of America of any state. Highest voter turnout in the last presidential election of any place in America. According to both the Washington Post and the Homeland Security Secretary, the safest state in America to vote. That's the record I'm running on. I'm fortunate and blessed to have the support of many people across the political spectrum. In fact, the majority of Democratic clerks who've endorsed in this race have endorsed my reelection because they have seen that day after day, I have been there to deliver what you expect out of a Secretary of State, which is fair and open and nonpartisan elections. I'm running on that record. My name is Wayne Williams. I would very much appreciate your support for my reelection as Colorado's Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we want to thank all of our candidates. Phil Weiser, George Brockler, thank you very much. Brian Watson, Dave Young, thank you. Jenna Griswold, Wayne Williams, thank you.